Okay, so here I'm going to talk about the Q&A developer responses. They're up on MMO Champion in transcript form. I'm just basically going to go through these and give my thoughts on them. So the first section is on flying. Now, we can go over whether flying should be in the game or not, and obviously the developers have been going round and round on this. But the bottom line is where they now see the they've accepted that people want flying, so they've basically come to the conclusion they're going to have flying in every tier from now on. And but they want to stick to their guns, which is fair enough. That they want people to explore the world first, which is something you just don't do if you're flying around it. You miss out so much. So what they're doing is they're saying, in order to fly, in 6.2, of course, you've got to complete several achievements which involve you going around the world on foot, and then you can get access to flying. They're going to say this is going to be the format for expansions to come. You know, they want you to make sure you have explored the world properly, to make sure you know it, then you can have your flying. Okay? There isn't really a great deal more to say on it on that point. The next thing was reputations. Now, what they've said here is, I'll read it out. The patch 6.0 reputations aren't defensible, so they're straight away accepting that these weren't good. Complete mob grinds that were added late in the process. Now, reputations have been done very differently in different forms of the game. In excuse me, in vanilla, there were various different ways to do it, including like raid reputations, where you just naturally got it while you did what you were wanting to do, which is raid. Some of them were very grindy as well. What they're saying is here that the 6.2 reputations are better, they say. There are weekly and daily quests you can do rather than endlessly killing mobs, and killing rare mobs gives reputation. Okay. What they've also said is that to get revered in the 3 reps that are in Tanan Jungle, which is what you need revered to be able to get the flying. And that's revered, bear in mind. Exalted takes longer. They reckon if you do the dailies every day, it will take you about 3 weeks. Now, if that ain't a grind, I don't know what is. And it really doesn't matter how you do it. I know I've been on the PTR, I've had to go into Nan Jungle. For a lot of players, it's going to seem a grind. Now, the same thing comes into dailies. Now, on the next section, we're talking very much about Apexis dailies, and they said that Apexis dailies, as could be seen, I said this myself when I was doing it on beta, it says it's a result of the overreaction to daily quests in Mr. Pandaria. In Mr. Pandaria, dailies just went mad. I hated dailies. Once I didn't have to do them anymore, I just wouldn't do them, even if I was bored. It was just out of principle. I hated them. A lot of people hated them. Not because of what they were. Dailies have been in the game for a good long time. Dailies have been in the game. In fact, there were even some dailies you could do in vanilla towards the end, and TBC had the Isle of Caldenas and stuff like that. And I used to do those. They were all right. And I think the reason they were all right is because I didn't have to do them. I did them because, you know, if I was a bit bored or there's some time to do some extra stuff, I could do them. Now, you have to do them, and everyone has to do them. And it doesn't matter whether you're a casual player that just wants to come on for a couple of hours a day, or maybe just a few hours a week, or you're a raider with actually, you've got plenty on your plate. When a new raid tier comes out, a raider has got a lot of stuff to do. They don't really need the extra, and yet you've still got to do it. And that's what I resent, and I think that's what a lot of players probably do as well. I don't know that. And I think this is one of those things where I don't understand why Blizzard don't ever ask people. They say they listen to feedback, but I struggle to believe that, because where is this feedback? In the 10 years this game has come out, I have never once received a questionnaire to fill out about the game. Now, obviously, they can't read millions upon millions of responses if we were to type out what we felt. But why not just send questionnaires every few months, or with each content patch at least, and just, you know, with each feature, just say how much are you actually enjoying it? Not how much are you doing it, because they can see that themselves. How much are you enjoying it? Because just because a lot of people do some content does not mean they like it. We're forced into it. And I think that's the problem. I don't think there's a problem with dailies. You know, incentivize it for people who are a bit more casual and don't have a lot to do. But for people who have got raiding to do, we want to get ready for the raiding, and that's what we want to focus on. We don't really need these distractions, but we have to do it. We know we have to do it. We've got to get that legendary ring. And we know, even with the flying, okay, I'm not bothered about flying. I don't care about flying. But I also know, especially being on a PvP server, that I am at a massive disadvantage if I don't have flying when other people do. That's just a fact. If they want me out in the world, I am a sitting duck if I don't have flying and lots of other people do. So it's again one of those things where they'll say, well, it's optional. No, it's not. If it puts you at a disadvantage, it is not optional. The next point up for discussion was professions and garrisons. Now, obviously, this is a massive change to the way these have both been done in World of Warcraft before. Professions especially. Now, what they've said here is they wanted to make sure garrisons were adequately rewarding for players, as they say, as it was a key feature of the expansion. And it was. The garrisons are a great feature. I absolutely love them. But I think they've acknowledged that people have just become over-reliant upon them. Anything that they can do in the world, they can do better in the garrison. And that's certainly fair. And when it comes to farming materials, your miners, your herbers, and your skinners in particular, what were they doing? They didn't need to do any of this anymore. In fact, I've had alts that had these professions on them, and I've removed some of them. Not all of them, but I have removed some of these professions and given them more useful ones. Now what they're wanting to do in Tanaan Jungle is re-incentivize these professions. Because to get Fellblight, which is like the new Savage Blood, I think, you need it to craft the much higher item level gear. You get this from Tanaan Jungle, and you can only get it from gathering professions. Well, if you're someone who has got rid of your mining or herbing or skinning, you're going to feel a bit pissed at the moment. Because the only option left to you will be fishing. And there's only so many people can be asked to sit around fishing. And I have no idea how much fishing you would have to do to gather any Fellblight. So yeah, again, something you can understand the change. Yes, these gathering professions were totally useless then, but I personally feel that they probably should have said, okay, well, this was just for this expansion. Next expansion they'll be useful again, because this is quite sudden. And I'm not convinced they're really getting the message out there that if people had skinning and mining and herbing, that they are going to be useful again very, very soon, within a couple of weeks. They've also acknowledged that the garrisons, they say here, garrisons giving you loot from the next highest raid tier didn't work out well. When some guilds finished normal and went to clear heroic, they already had a good number of heroic items and didn't need much loot. Yeah. Obviously the caches don't reward weapons and tier, but you can well understand people who, especially if they take quite a long... If you're a guild that does two different modes of it, like progress through two different modes, like for example you progress through normal and then you progress through heroic, rather than just blast through the first one in the first week, yes, this is a problem, because you're going into that harder mode and the only thing available to you are weapons and tier, and for the rest of it you are probably just... There's maybe the odd piece that people still need, of course, but you are largely probably just hoping for Warforged and Socket. So yeah, to go through the first few bosses of the new difficulty and to be disenchanting a lot of that stuff, that must be quite hard. That must be a harsh old experience. So I don't know what they're saying on this one. Is that's not going to happen from this tier, or is it just that they've realised it's a mistake and will stop this happening in future tiers? I don't know. But they have acknowledged that it was a bit silly for people to sit in their garrisons and get access to gear from bosses they weren't even killing yet. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why that is a problem, but I think the main thing they're saying here is it is a problem because when you get on to killing those bosses, the loot is no longer useful to you. Naval missions, they say, require less micromanagement. You've got fewer followers. Well, this is certainly true. You can only have like 4 ships, I think. Less frequent missions. Again, I've been on the PTR. This is certainly true. And meaningful rewards. Having to log in for every 30 to 45 minutes to send followers out of mission distracts from gameplay. Yes, of course it does. People that, want to keep sending them off on the short duration missions, it absolutely stopped you playing other aspects of the game, definitely. Obviously, what they say is the current garrison, and we know this anyway, the current garrison is only something for WoD. The general ideas behind it they like, and there should be something in the next expansion, but who knows what. Obviously, it's one of these things where they'll take the features that people thought were good and try and keep those, and try to prune away all the aspects of it that were bad. And what they are very clearly saying is that they want people to go out into the world, and anything that stops you going out into the world to do things is bad. So I think the idea of being able to get your own ore and herbs in your own garrison is probably going to be gone, certainly in the next expansion. On the issue now, this is something that which I have very definite opinions on the issues of guilds and raiding. The comments here, it says, guilds have disbanded in every raid tier. The glue that keeps guilds together is the officers and leader, and as they move on with their lives, guilds break up. And this is absolutely true. I'm not going to argue with this at all. There's a lot of people on MMO forums, and I've replied to a couple myself, have this perception that guilds are breaking up left, right and centre. Now, there are two reasons. It's not people who have been stupid. There are two reasons for this perception, I feel. One of them is this. And it's paradoxically because it's now so easy to raid at the normal and heroic level. So you have a guild that is heroic raiding, progressing through heroic Blackrock Foundry. This is the content that used to be the old normal mode. In MOP and before, this was normal mode. The second hardest content, for which you needed a fixed size. Now you don't. So you can aim for about 20, let's say. A lot of these guilds don't even have that. It's mostly between 10 and 15, if truth be told. But you have a certain number of raiders. So let's say on a particular night, a couple of people don't show. That's fine. You just raid without them. Unless it's like both your tanks missing and you don't have anyone else with a suitable tank off-spec gear and skill set to do it, you're still going. You're going with fewer people. You've got all of a sudden 23 people that night. That's fine. You go with 23 people. So as long as the key roles are still there and you've got enough people to play those roles, you're not bound by strict numbers. You're very flexible, and this is great. And this has probably allowed for more guilds to access that level of difficulty. The problem then comes with this. You've got a number of guilds, and probably quite a lot, that are not going to blast through heroic in their first week. They're not that good. But they will get through it well before the introduction of the new raid tier. So you've got now guilds who have completed 10 out of 10 heroic in Blackrock Foundry. So they want to do mythic. Of course they do. It's the natural progression. Why wouldn't you? But now it's different. The guild model of taking as many people as you've got online and obviously don't need to be carried. They can pull their own weight. That's gone. You need 20 people. And you need very specific numbers of different roles. And you may need specific classes. Now, you can't have a roster of 20 because some people naturally are going to be away on a particular night. So you've got to have more than that, which means on the night when everyone's there, you've got people on the bench. Now, a lot of raiders, especially if they're used to the heroic mode where they know that if they log on that night, there's a spot for them. Now there isn't, because they've been told, oh, okay, sorry, we don't need you. We might need you tomorrow, but not tonight. Or we might need you in a few hours' time. Could you just sit on the bench, please? You know, if we need you in for that fight later on. They don't like that. They want to raid all the time. Now, a mythic raider is used to the idea of a bench. We're content with that. None of us like to be on the bench, of course, but we accept that we have to be sometimes. But they don't. So what happens is these guilds just collapse, and they blame aspects of the game. But in reality, it's the fact that that guild is not set up. And because they didn't think long-term enough in terms of going mythic, they just tried one day, okay, well, we've done heroic now. What do we do? Oh, we have to go to mythic. And just try and get 20 people. And it doesn't work because those people will not accept it. And the guild ends up failing rather than either just accepting that it's just heroic mode or adapting to mythic mode. So that's one very strong source of guild disbands. The other bit of evidence I would suggest that sort of demonstrates that this is not happening left, right, and centre. I mean, I've been in this game quite a while. I did take a very strong break. I'm not going to say I've been playing every raid tier since Vanilla. I haven't. Most of them, but not all. But guilds have disbanded in every raid tier there's ever been, right back to Vanilla in tier 1. I've noticed several guilds disband. But those players don't stop raiding. They just form another guild. Another guild forms to take the bullets. And I know this is happening because I recruit in my guild. And if guilds were toppling over left, right and centre, there should be loads of people applying. There should be all over the place, and they're not. And even I look at recruitment. Some guilds have their recruitment forums publicly viewable, and I look at some of these. And even top guilds, they're not getting loads of applications. They get a steady stream of them. A lot of them not really up to their standards, so a lot of them, they don't get a lot of quality applications. But there's not a lot of applications going out on that, and that is because it's a fallacy to suppose that guilds are disbanding and constantly disbanding. It's because of the way raiding is done now. No, they're not disbanding. Some guilds are just failing to adapt, or, as Blizzard have noted there, the leader, a crucial leader within that guild, has said, real life's come up. Sorry, lads, I'm having to step back from the game. And there's no one there to take over the reins of it. So they all go their separate ways. They don't just stop. A couple may stop raiding. Most of them don't stop raiding. They just go to different guilds. They might reform their own guild. I've known this happen, where a leader steps back, and rather than someone taking over that guild, they say, well, actually, do you know what? There's certain aspects of the guild I think could be done better. We'll just form our own guild and do it a different way. And that happens too. Now, the next thing was on dungeons. Time walking and dungeons. Well, obviously, 5-man dungeons are a core part of World of Warcraft. These sort of small group dungeons are a core part of a great many MMOs. And it's changed very much over the years. Now we're in an expansion where there are no new 5-man dungeons coming out, which people have been used to for the last few expansions. Later on in the expansion, new dungeons coming out. That's not going to happen. What they're doing is what in some people's eyes will be rehashes of old dungeons. Certainly that's what it is. And you've got two main types. Time walking dungeons and mythic dungeons. Now, time walking dungeons are basically just old dungeons from a long time ago, perhaps before a lot of the modern players, not all, but a lot of the modern players were playing the game. Maybe if your TBC dungeon comes out, well, people were around for those at the time. So, it's like saying, oh, this one that you may have blasted through on your leveling up, or you might have missed out completely. Here, have a little go at it now. Now, the interesting thing about time walking, I think some people have missed this out. It wasn't stated explicitly about it. Sorry for the sniffling, bit of hay fever. But someone asked a question. I can't remember what it was now. I think it might have been on Twitter. Someone asked a question. Because we're being scaled down, so it's a TBC dungeon, let's say, and you're being scaled down to level 70. And they were asked, does that mean we can use level 70 weapons and gear? And the answer came back yes. So the suggestion is that all you rogues, warriors, and anything else that has, for example, the legendary Twin Blades of Azeroth, you can take those, equip them, because you're being scaled down to level 70. So those weapons could actually be quite good. And you get to use those with your Cursed Vision of Sargeras if you want to look like, the way you pimp yourself out when you're standing around in Stormwind and Ironforge. You can actually use them again. Now that might be interesting for people. The other thing to note about these Time Walker dungeons, they do say, they're not just to be in the game as they are. They're just going to make brief, they might be open for a week or something like that for you to try them out. Now the interesting point about that is, again, I've played MMOs in the past where you can do things like this because they scale, and they're obviously working on this in the game, being able to scale players down or being able to scale dungeons up. Obviously it looks like it's the former at the moment, in order to be able to do this on a wider range. So it might well be that every couple of weeks there's a new Time Walker dungeon available. I mean, there's a lot of dungeons in the game. They could do this for quite a lot of them. And it's just something new and a bit interesting. And I actually if that's what they do, would be generally in favour of it. I don't mind it at all. It's not necessarily something that I personally am going to do a lot of, but I can well see how for some other players it could be interesting. So I'm not going to knock that one. Now, Mythic Dungeons are another matter entirely. It sounds great. You've got the World of Draenor dungeons, and it sounds like, okay, they're going to make them harder mechanics and, you know, maybe an extra phase with some of the bosses. Yeah, great. Because that's what Mythic would suggest to you if you compare, say, Mythic raids to heroic raids. No. It's the same dungeons, it's the same mechanics, it's exactly the same. They've just increased the health pool of the mobs in there, and they've increased the damage that they do to you. The problem is that our gear has increased massively, and I will be willing to bet that anyone in decent raid gear, not necessarily even Mythic, will just blast through those dungeons and barely notice the difference. So yeah, I think I'm not at all in favour of the Mythic one. I would rather they just did time walking ones, quite frankly, and gave off the gear for that, and just had at any one time a couple of time walking dungeons available for you, because this is Mythic. Yeah, Mythic dungeons. If you're not going to actually change, make the mechanics harder, or add any extra phases to it, or do anything like that, I really don't see the point. I do not see the point. Now, the next bit is raids. They've said that they're happy with the length of fights for raids. I'd go with that, tier 17. I actually think the raids have been really good. There's only 2 bosses I would say have not been good, in my personal view, and that is Maidens and Blackhand. Maidens, because if you look at a balanced raid roster for Mythic raiding, it would not necessarily have been very effective on Maidens. It may have been, it may not. So some guilds would have got through Maidens really quickly because they just happened to have the right classes available. Let's say multiple druids and a brewmaster tank, or a non-shield tank. Now, if you're a guild, as we were when we first came across it, that had 2 shield tanks and a druid, we were in a bit of trouble. We ended up killing it quite easily in the end after a lot of time, because one of our shield tanks had a viable brewmaster, so we geared it up quickly and he was able to use that, and we managed to recruit another couple of druids. So that sorted itself out. Blackhand, because it absolutely does not favour any balanced raid. Anyone who's got a balanced raid roster, sorry, you're out of luck on Blackhand. Yes, alright, when you leave it a bit longer and you've geared up a bit more, and the few nerfs came into Blackhand, you're now in a position where you can take a lot of melee and still kill it. But if you're wanting to compete, if you're wanting to kill this thing quickly, if you were a guild that didn't have access to a lot of ranged, you were screwed. Now, although I don't mind the idea that some guilds, obviously they're going to push for the high world ranks, will have a situation where they say, look, if you play a class, like I do, Retribution Paladin, if you play a class that on some fights is not likely to be all that strong, you should probably have an alt of something that is strong, so that on those fights we can use that alt, and you should be able to play it well. I get that for the high. It's not for me, but for the ones really pushing World 100 and things like that, yeah, I get that. That's okay, I don't mind that. But when you're saying to other guilds, you're going to have a hard time if you can't do that, even further down the progression curve, that's just wrong. That's not right. But in terms of what they were talking about, they were very much talking about, the length of fights. They said that if a fight is basically going to have one phase, it's going to have the same mechanics all the way through the fight, it shouldn't be longer than 5 or 6 minutes. Fair enough, I have to agree with that. I'm fine with that. They said that end bosses with many phases should go on for about 10 minutes or so. They did say they thought Mythic Margok was too long because of the extra phase. I don't think I agree with that. I thought it was fine. I didn't find it repetitive between the different phases, because they're over in a reasonable amount of time. I thought they were okay. Yes, of course, it's always frustrating when you get like 12 minutes into a fight and then something goes wrong and you all wipe. But that's just the nature of progress raiding. I thought it was okay. They said about maidens, that it was all right, but the first half of the fight felt too slow. I don't know. I suppose it depends on which role you're playing. And if you rushed and pushed them to 20%, it wasn't a massively long fight. But if you waited for the third bout, it felt longer. Well, that's true. Any fight where you're having to take DPS off for any extended period of time, more than a few seconds, yeah, is not great. And you certainly have to do that if you're going to push the third bout. On the issue of raid itemization, it says, now, there's a couple of things they say in here that gets me thinking, and I hope I'm not reading too much into it. I actually hope I am reading too much into it. The question is still in the air as to how many raid tiers this expansion is going to have. We used to have 4. Vanilla had 4 raid tiers. Lasted a couple of years. TBC had 4. Lasted a couple of years. Wrath of the Lich King had 4. And people felt that the last one dragged. But it still had 4 and lasted a couple of years. Then Cataclysm still lasted a couple of years, but we only had 3. Well, obviously Dragon Soul then dragged out. Mop still lasted a couple of years. And we had 3 raid tiers. So then Siege of Orgrimmar really dragged out. This game has now been out not a year. By the time BlizzCon comes around, it'll be about a year. People expect the the announcement for the next expansion to come at BlizzCon. It certainly hasn't come out now. Not a sniff of it. Now, if that's the case, then you're saying that Warlords of Draenor must be out for at least a couple of years before the next expansion. There is no other way of doing it. Well, that surely has got to mean we can't have 2 raid tiers. That would be nonsense. That's out there. I mean, let's just put that to one side. That cannot happen. But then they make little statements like this. There's a couple here. This one, you're definitely reading too much into it if you look at this as evidence. But they say, the vast majority of players in the game aren't going to get 735 weapons because they won't kill Mythic Archimond. They're talking about the idea that there's 4 different item levels within the same difficulty of the same raid tier, which is something completely new. But then you look at it another way and think, well, this sort of means... Are they implying that this means you're never going to get that item level of weapon? Because, of course, if another raid tier comes out, you would get it. You just wouldn't get it off Archimond. You just get it off the next raid tier. Yes, you're reading too much into it if you read that. But then you look at another statement. Where is it? A bit later on. It says here, when they're talking about the fact that Archimond obviously drops the highest item level in that instance, 735 at Mythic. No other boss drops that. The previous boss dropped 730. Now, weapons are obviously really important. Any gear is, the higher the item level, often the better it is. For weapons, this is definitely true. For example, hunters don't get a bow off Archimond. Alright. So, and their argument is, what they actually say is, the mythic player that doesn't have a best in slot agility weapon on Archimond will have a 730 during progression, while other players in the raid won't even have a 730. Well, okay. First of all, it doesn't apply to every other player, because some will. But even if it doesn't, your big problem is that when you have killed Archimond, what do you do? Mythic Archimond, what do you do as a Mythic Raider? You farm that for the next tier of content. Well, the hunters know they will never be able to get a 735 weapon. Again, putting the tinfoil hat on, does this mean, oh, no more raid tiers? This is it. No more raid tiers. Because how are they supposed to do that? We're expecting these hunters to gear up, and they're just going to get further and further behind because their weapon is 5 item levels below, which doesn't sound like much, but it is. Your weapon is so crucial as a DPS, and the item level of that weapon just simply makes it better. As a Retribution Paladin, you ask, what is my best weapon? It's whatever has the highest item level. It's as simple as that. So I am a bit concerned about this, really. The other concern I have, again, just constantly thinking about it, because they refuse to say if there's going to be another raid tier, which should be a simple thing to say. Yes, of course there is, but they don't. And again, I'm thinking, well, are they really trying to lengthen this but make it so that it actually takes a lot of guilds a long time to do it. Because you can look at it this way. Take Blackrock Foundry, for example. So you go through the first few bosses on Blackrock Foundry, you get in your gear, and then you maybe get stuck on a slightly harder boss. Let's say Cromog, for example. It's a middle boss. And what do you have to do on Cromog? End of the day, it's really about DPS checks. DPS checks on the stone pillars. If you don't mech that, that's it, you're wiping. DPS control on the hands. You want, on the one hand, you need to do enough damage to get them down in a reasonable amount of time. On the other hand, not too early because you kill people. Those jobs are made a lot simpler with gear. So what happens is, a guild that can't make those DPS checks or cannot manage that control, what do they do? Well, it's all right, lads. After another week, next week, we'll have another 5 bosses worth of gear that will make us stronger. We'll make those DPS checks. Great. Not so much in Hellfire Citadel. I'm not saying this doesn't happen, but it's not so much. Because the first few bosses are only dropping 720 and your later bosses dropping 730, for example. So the gear you get off the earlier bosses is becoming less and less useful when you are progressing on the harder bosses. So it doesn't make you as an extra gear week worth of reset. Behave yourself. An extra resets worth of gear doesn't make you as powerful as it did in tier 17. And that means that you're going to still have to make that DPS check by playing better, really. You can't just rely on the gear closing that gap, or increasing your margin for error, whichever way you want to look at it. So yeah, it's certainly a way to increase the now, of course, that doesn't prove that they're not planning to put another tier of content in. It's obviously always going to be the case that they want content to last as long as possible, because obviously time and resources needed to develop content. It's no good if people log on and finish it in really quickly. The longer it can last, the better for them. The better for all of us. But yeah, I just keep reading this and thinking, it makes sense if you accept this is the last tier of the expansion. And some things, to me, seem questionable if it's not the last tier of the expansion. And yeah, I just find it a little bit worrying, really. So on the subject of classes, they've noted down a few classes. They talk about demonology for warlocks. There's a little bit on that. Talking about how it's the best all-round spec, but it won't be. It'll be like the weakest one in the next tier. I'm less concerned about that myself. I have to say, I do think that pure DPS classes, they obviously have the benefit of having 3 different specs. You know that on a given fight, one of them is going to be strong. And I think in a tier, you have dual spec as a feature. It's been in the game for quite a long time. You probably should be proficient with 2 of them. It's the same role after all. It's a completely different kettle of fish to, for example, me as a paladin. I can have protection or holy as an off spec, but it's a completely different role. So being expected to play those as well as DPS is a benefit. It's an advantage. Is it expected at most levels of the game? No. At some of the very top levels, perhaps. At most levels, no. Because you're not just having to learn a different rotation, different set of spells. You're having to learn a different role, a completely different role within the game. Around in a raid, you've got tanks, you've got melee DPS, you've got ranged DPS, and you've got healers, and they all are quite specialised. Take the classes out of it completely. There are specialised skills and experiences required to be good in any of those roles. So yeah, with warlocks, I'm sorry, I've got no sympathy. If you only play demonology exclusively, not got a great deal of sympathy. You should have been playing at least one of the other 2 specs as well. Ability pruning may not have gone far enough, they say. Shamans may not need the unleash spells. Some classes had abilities pruned that shouldn't have been in the class fantasy suffered. Don't get me started on the class fantasy. I mean, they actually do say, where is it now? Rotation changes in the future will improve the fantasy of playing your class, really. So I can only assume that at some point they will finally admit that for Retribution Paladins we shouldn't have had empowered seals ever. But this isn't a Paladin thing, so I'm just going to forget about that. I'll just mutter about that quietly to myself in the dark corners of my mind. But what they do say is rotations aren't designed to be engaged when you're fighting a target dummy, because during PvP or a boss encounter, you're getting out of fire, line of sighting things, interrupting, worry about ads, blah, 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 blah. Which is fair enough, yes. Okay. So, yeah, people who say, oh, on a target dummy I do this, well, who cares? You're not fighting a target dummy when you're doing either PvP or raiding. It says that the game is less dominated by absorbs than it was in Mists of Pandaria. Now, it's very much getting on to healing here. Healing, of course, out of all of the roles, changed the most. Tanking changed quite a bit. Healing changed the most. Now, they are quite frank about a few things here. And for some players, they'll read this and go, okay, they're aware of this and they actually want to do something about it. Others might be a bit worried. I'll tell you why in a minute. So it says the game is less dominated by absorbs than it was in Mists of Pandaria. There is more healing where people are not just full or dead. Disc priests and absorb-centric healing need to be scaled back in the future. They say if you have almost any raid comp, you need a disc priest and some other healers. Holy priests are in a great place in terms of versatility right now, but if you have only one priest in your guild, they should be disciplined. Absorbs come at the expense of other heals, stopping bars from becoming empty, which makes the other healers that enjoy refilling bars sad. What they seem to be saying is that if you are a disciplined priest at the moment and playing at any sort of reasonable level of raiding, I think what they're probably saying is you might want to acquaint yourself with Holy. Not necessarily immediately. Disc priests still needed in Hellfighter. This is not something that's going to change in 6.2. This is very much, I think, thinking about the next expansion, I think, because it would involve a totally different way of doing healing. And I'm going to say that if you're a disciplined priest and you still intend to be healing in the next tier, in the next expansion, sorry. Oh, please God, that might actually be the next tier. Oh, no. You might need to make sure that you can do actual holy as well, because maybe discipline will suffer, is what they seem to be suggesting. Or maybe not. Maybe it will just change. So it won't be all about the absorbs anymore, but that doesn't make any sense. So I'm reading this and I'm really thinking, yeah. If you are getting by at the moment by just spamming shields everywhere and the odd penance, yeah, maybe not for much longer. Next thing they were talking about is just general patch 6.1 things. Talked about Twitter integration wasn't a high priority feature. I think some people have accused them of introducing like frivolous content like the selfie camera and the Twitter stuff, which I quite like. I've not used the Twitter stuff, but the selfie camera I like. As if it's taken away from other more meaningful content. Their point being it didn't really take from outdoor content. It's a feature that only a few programmers worked on. They said it was only a convenience added for players that already use Twitter, and the selfie camera was a side project for one designer and programmer who worked on it for a few weekends. It wasn't anything that took a great deal of time. That's fair enough, and I don't think it would have been. Says there have been many features that started as side projects, such as hard to find hunter pets, toys, or the Brawlers Guild. Patch 6.1 was extremely light on content and might have been named patch 6.0.5. Now, on that point, they have said this, and they've said this on more than one occasion, and people sort of talked about 6.1 as the selfie expansion. I think what a lot of people forget is that as a raider, I don't see it as a light patch, because it brought Blackrock Foundry. Yes, Blackrock Foundry did not come out at the same time as 6.1, but it was part of that patch nonetheless. It was all part of that content. So yeah, I think maybe they would have just done better to make sure that Blackrock Foundry came out on that same date, because it was all part of the same thing, really, I thought. But that's maybe just me. Okay, so just to round off their miscellaneous stuff, they say that they're quite proud of the leveling content in Draenor. I'm not going to disagree with that. I enjoy it. I have leveled now, I think, 13 characters to level 100. It has been enjoyable. It's fine. It doesn't take very long as well, especially now with the heirlooms. It takes no time at all. In fact, it's actually too quick. But it's not even just the speed. The actual, leveling experience, I think, has been enjoyable. I think there's enough new things in it. There's been enough new things like looking for treasures and bits and pieces like that. And the quests have been engaging. And I have very much liked it. It says the adventure journal was added to give newer and returning players an idea of what content to do. The journal has been in since, I think, Cataclysm was introduced, wasn't it? It's a very good feature. I absolutely love it. So yeah, I'm not going to complain about things like that. It says the team doesn't want inconvenience to stop you doing content, but they also have to be mindful of the downsides of making everything too convenient. Certainly true. How many people do you see on forums complaining, oh, there's nothing to do in World of Warcraft? And these are people who don't obviously do the hardest content. I'm not going to slate them for that. End of the day, if you can't commit that time to it and this is just a game you want to drop in and out of, why should you? But yeah, sometimes making aspects of the game a bit too convenient means it's too quick, and therefore people perceive themselves, they will say there's no content. In actual fact, there's loads of content. And I think that was the thing. We were coming back to the flying, that the reason the developers are making us get all these achievements to be able to get the flying, I think it's their way of saying, fuck you, there is content, it's there, do it. And I think that's true. There is content. Not everyone might enjoy all of it, but there absolutely is content. There's a lot of content. In fact, I would argue there's more content now than there ever has been in the past. If you think about it, from Mists of Pandaria, what have we actually lost? We've lost scenarios. Well, I didn't like those much anyway. Some people did, though, so I did think it was a bit curious dropping scenarios. But we don't have scenarios, but we do have several other features, and all of the old features are still there. So, yeah, I think there's been a lot of content. It's just not necessarily everyone likes it all, and perhaps the development team need to be aware that just because content exists doesn't mean if people don't enjoy it and they don't have to do it, they won't do it. It's all right you saying, well, there's content there. It's like, yeah, but I don't like that content. But it is a tough one. Obviously, everyone's different. You can't please everyone. In fact, you can't please anyone, I think, entirely. The group finder added in Warlords as an improvement over random matchmaking, they said, adding some of the social aspect back while avoiding spending an hour looking for a group in town. Blah, blah, blah. More blah, blah, blah. Artistic integrity is important to the team. Okay. The only thing that differentiated skill or accomplishment in Mists of Pandaria was colour. There was one set of armour for PvP and one for PvE, and then colour variation in each. I'll be honest, I don't even know what the sets look like now. I've given up. I just transmog everything. So that's fine. I've got no opinion on that one way or the other. In 6.2, there is one set of armour for average accomplishment and a modified version of the set for bigger accomplishment. I think the modified version tends to include bigger shoulders. Bigger, more outlandish shoulders seems to be the thing. But again, I just transmog it all anyway, I don't care. There are still two sets of gear, just tiers of skill rather than PvE and PvP. And that's basically it, so yeah. Those are my responses, I think, to what was discussed in that Q&A. The main thing I would take from it is I wish I could have asked my own questions, but obviously it was very staged and in-house, and we're not really going to get to the nitty-gritty of what we want. The one thing I would like to know is, are we going to get another raid tier in this expansion? And if not, oh my god. Oh my god. Surely we must. Surely. Anyway, those are my thoughts for now, so see you later.